Welcome to another Oceans Institute livestream. I'm Charlotte Beckmanus and I'll be your host for this evening. And tonight we're talking to someone a little bit different. Angela Rossen is not a scientist, but she's an artist and she uses her work to convey science. So welcome, Angela, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thanks for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here because I've been
and welcome to another Oceans Institute live stream. I'm Charlotte Beckmanus and I'll be your host for this evening.
Format.
And tonight we're talking to someone
this presentation is a story of my coming to understand
Angela
how
Rossen is not a scientist,
human
but she's
behaviours
an
are
artist
impacting on the biosphere and why I've chosen to work with scientists. Every generation has been faced by challenges. But we have climate change and the associated issues that come from our overuse of natural resources. And the pandemic that we're in at the moment is part of that story. So what's this got to do with telling science stories through art? I'm an artist. And for years after graduating from art school, I ran a busy art practice with commissions from private and corporate and institutional clients. I presented exhibitions on average every 2 years. It was an exhausting and fabulously exciting schedule, and I was always getting on a plane to go somewhere, and I travelled extensively throughout Australia to paint and draw in the landscape. And it was fun and exciting. And whilst I paint all sorts of things, nature is my subject. And here in Western Australia, we live in paradise. We are so lucky. Just the plants in my garden. These little spiders I photographed in my garden. That's a jumping spider and his lovely maiden. But it's the ocean that I return to every time. I can't remember the exact turning point, but it was somewhere around about 2006, 2007 that a gradual understanding of the implications of climate change moved me towards the world of scientific research. The very plants and animals which were the focus of my artistic work were disappearing or changing. And having no formal scientific training and no baseline data, I wasn't sure of my own observations over the years as I drew and painted. Was I imagining it? After years of snorkelling the metropolitan beaches and offshore islands, I was beginning to see changes in species and plant densities that I couldn't comprehend. I was painting all the while. I love to paint nature. And as I said, we live in paradise. This is our own beaches. I also try to take photographs underwater and use them for teaching. The fact that you can jump in the ocean down at Cottesloe and a seal will swim up to you and eyeball you is just fabulous. This red-lipped morwongs, I've actually seen them swim between people's legs and people don't realise. This crazy little skeleton shrimp. Everywhere I look, I see stunning beauty and I'm constantly inspired. Beautiful reefs. So those of you who are associated with the Oceans Institute will recognise this painting from the foyer. It's plankton and stars, and this painting which is in the adjacent area. I knew that I had to learn something about what I was seeing, and I decided to approach scientists and see if I could work with them. I didn't have time to do a science degree, but I knew I had to learn. I knew I had to form some kind of a partnership, and I approached Professor Di Walker and asked her if she'd be interested in doing a community outreach project all about seagrass. To my delight, she agreed. And her mentorship opened the door to the scientific community for me, and that was 2008. The Chancellery appointed me the inaugural artist in residence with the Oceans Institute, where I then went on to meet a whole group of incredible scientists who I've been working with ever since. So obviously seagrass is one of I decided to focus on what I could get to easily, and that's nearshore biodiversity. By taking on the project, which was extremely generous of her, Di actually gave a lot of time to snorkelling with me, and we travelled up to Shark Bay, where the largest seagrass meadows in the world exist. Chesapeake Bay might disagree with that, but I think we win. We flew over the meadows. We swam over the meadows. We've spent a tremendous amount of time together. And I'm very grateful to what she's taught me, which was also how to look. So if I was seeing with the eye of an artist before, I learned how to look with the eye of a scientist and to ask, to interrogate what I was seeing. And it's been an incredible process. Now, we're not such an unlikely alliance. Artists and scientists are powered by curiosity. And we're communicators and storytellers. There's no point discovering something if you don't share it, and there's no point making a painting about something if you're not going to show it to people. So my learning journey with my scientific colleagues began with me really learning how the scientific method works. Now, a lot of people don't understand it, and this is becoming painfully obvious in the discourse that's happening in America at this time, where people are confusing science with opinion or faith. The elegance of science, I'm just going to talk about for a minute. The elegance of systematic observation, of measurement and testing. You know, when I was thinking, am I seeing this? Are things changing? Am I imagining it? I learned how it is that scientists actually measure things, and it's very rigorous. I discovered how criticism is the very foundation of scientific method, and that new ideas must stand up to intense scrutiny by peers. That's huge. You know, you can't just stand up and say, I've discovered something, there it is, fait accompli. No, everyone's going to look at it and say, well, how did you get to that? Now, this is not something that needs to be said to scientists, but it needs to be made clear to people who are not scientists, because many people don't quite get the elegance and the loveliness of that, and how it is that our understanding of the natural world is built upon generations of great thinkers who've gone through these rigorous processes and arrived at conclusions that are part of every stitch in the tapestry of our understanding. Provable facts and disprovable facts. So it's a hot topic nowadays when so much misinformation is so easily circulated, and where it's so hard for young people who are surrounded by social media and those of us, all of us, we're all bombarded by information, to be able to think critically enough to work out what's misinformation and what's not. And science helps you do that. So when I began, I went to as many seminars as conferences as I possibly could, and I would spend the whole time writing on my little notepad, kind of hiding it, because I didn't want people to see what I was writing down. What I was writing down was words I didn't understand what they meant, so I could run home and look them up. And I found over time I needed to write down less and less words because I was getting the hang of it. Well, it has been some years. I hope I've learned something. I'm still learning. Every day I learn something. And those very scientific papers that I found so challenging in the beginning are making more sense to me. In bits and pieces, I still look things up, and I've got thousands of field guides. And then I discovered fieldwork with Professor Gary Kendrick and the Seagrass research team. It's wonderful to be out in nature with like-minded lunatics, is all I can say. For years, my kids have put up with me bringing buckets of specimen into the cottage when we're on holiday, and over the day it starts to stink, and the next morning it stinks even more. And then I found my tribe. Oh my God, I found a whole tribe of people who would rush down to the water in the morning as soon as they possibly could, collect buckets of things, bring them back, eat lunch as quick as they could, run down to the water again, face in the seagrass, flippers in the sky, and work ourselves nearly to death, doing all sorts of things that would seem to anybody who doesn't understand like sheer insanity. For example, counting the new seedlings within a seagrass meadow. It takes determination. It's physically terribly hard work. Putting out cameras in the middle of the night to see who eats your seagrass fruits. Well, I'm telling you, it was crabs. And we got hilarious videos. This little sketch I made of Gary swimming out at Parker Point to put his cameras out. And I was thinking, oh my God, they're going to be eaten by sharks. Anyway, seagrass, like all plants, are incredibly beautiful. And I set about learning as much as I could about them and trying to create images that would teach something. Now, I'm pausing on this one because this is a flowering Posidonia australis in the red phase. Whoever thought seagrass flowers? Whoever thought, I had no idea. I was swimming over meadows for years, and then I discovered these stunningly beautiful flowers. And if you look closely at this image, you'll see that flower is bejeweled with tiny droplets of oxygen. So it is the plants in the ocean that create half of the oxygen we breathe. And if we wanted to mess up the ocean, we can decide not to breathe every second breath. And that's a very sobering thought. And here, this little photo that I took one day shows there are the droplets looking like jewels. There's the fruit. There's the fruit after it floated away and was collected by my colleagues. And that whole thing of coming back at the end of a field trip and sitting and discussing what you're doing and thinking, can we do it better? Have we been thorough enough? How are we going to plan tomorrow? Sorting out what was brought back, preparing gear for tomorrow. It's terribly exciting. And then I'd be furiously taking photos of everything and sitting up all night and trying to take better photos. And I've sort of learned to take slightly better photos. I'm still learning. If anyone has got some hints, I'm always in the mood. But nature is full of stunning beauty. And if you're interested in taking photos, there's plenty to find. So I'm pleased that some of my photos are used by my colleagues. Just a little story about this. I was snorkeling with Marion Cambridge, another brilliant scientist who's been very generous with her time. And the Posidonia seagrass flowers were ready to shed their pollen. And I brought some back to the studio and I sat there with them in a jar and all my cameras and lights set up. And I thought, any minute now, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And I finally got a time lapse of that glorious moment when the pollen is released into, well, the water column, but in this instance, my vase. And I picked up my phone to phone Marion and say, Marion, I got it, and realised it was 4 a.m. So I've found my tribe, this kind of, it starts a kind of mania. And I sat there with them in a jar when you're passionate about things. And it's fun. It's fun. I love it. So here's some other things that I've photographed. I'm delighted when my photographs can support my scientific colleagues when they appear in scientific journals or on the cover of books. That's Marion and Anne Brearley, a very brilliant taxonomist who is extremely generous with her time. And it's wonderful to talk and consult with people. And when I began, I had very little scientific underpinning. So I'm grateful for the generosity of people like Dr. Brearley and also Marion Cambridge. So during the artist in residence period with the Oceans Institute, my studio was at Floreat CSIRO site, which made it possible for me to also attend the seminars with the Oceans and Atmosphere flagship and to meet scientists working in those areas. And it was a time of tremendous learning. I don't remember a time when there's not tremendous learning, but what I was determined to do was to take it out to the community in some form or another that would have resonance. And I learned a great deal from the Public Health Department smoking campaign, which my children were part of. Children in school were taught about the consequences of smoking and how it impacted on the health of families and communities of smokers. And armed with this knowledge, they set about members of the family who were smokers. And it was amazing to watch 2 little kids explaining the dangers and pleading with people they loved to stop smoking. They had understood the science and they'd learned how to communicate it persuasively. Amongst our circle, actually, almost everyone stopped smoking because of it. And this was part of a social change that came about through education. And it also came about by economic levers, because as you probably remember, the price of cigarettes went up by a lot at that time. But it was education and it was a determination by the health department to engage the general public in this as a health initiative. And it worked. And I'm sure everybody of my age will remember how smoking just became not okay. And we're all better for it now. So inspired by this, I designed a series of events to engage children and their families and the wider community with nature. I did expos and field events. and school events and workshops. I wanted to find a way to get people to fall in love with the natural world. The aim of this, as well, is to bring scientists out of the academy, to share their knowledge with the community. And these events were about coming together to discover the plants and areas and animals in a particular area that was relevant to those people who were taking part. And that include parks and reserves, waterways, the coast and remnant bushlands. I put together fun educational events for schools and community groups and partnered where possible with anybody who'd be interested in partnering: local government, NRMs, naturalist and conservation groups, anybody. I'll do it with anybody. If you're in the mood, we'll set up some fabulous community event where people will engage with nature and really learn about it. So I discovered one night an idea by a Michigan science teacher. He put this up on the internet and said, use this to show kids nature. And I worked with a retired gentleman called Graham Harris to develop what we called an iScope stand. Now, this transforms a digital device, an iPad or a tablet of any kind or a phone, into a ×25 microscope. And it's a fantastic device for looking into the very secrets of nature. For example, without magnification, with magnification. So that's the tentacle you see there with the nemastocysts in it. That's the bit you want to avoid if you're swimming, because you'll get a nasty sting out of that. And that gives you a bit of an idea of how fantastic it is just to be able to enhance the optics of these already terribly clever devices we have. But because it's on a device, everyone can look at it. And it's been fantastic at expos. The images on the bottom here give you an idea of magnification of tiny things that you actually find in seagrass or sand. And people can record these animals and plants on their own phones and take those images away with them. So it's a instantaneous connectedness that's really fun. And of course, it's fantastic in schools because a number of children can work with one iPad and do a whole series of exciting things, from observing and recording to actually making a video or a presentation, and they can beam it across the classroom to their own workstation and continue to work on it. So in this age of digital devices, we can have a great time using them for education. And for fun, it's fun to take photos of things. So with the success of the expos, I decided on a community biodiversity festival. And I approached various entities in Geraldton and was successful in running a festival, which I'm going to show you some of the fun things that we did. I worked with the City of Greater Geraldton, the Northern Catchment Council, and 4 different schools, community groups, naturalist groups, art groups, all sorts of community groups, anyone who wanted to come along and join the fun. I'm telling you, we had a ball. We created in the end a whole exhibition, but we began with a biodiversity survey on the beach. And people were invited to just come and see what they can find. Come and have a fun time discovering what's on the beach, because there's lots of stuff on the beach you never really kind of notice. And just sitting and drawing. Now, something happens when you sit down and draw. And it's not just kids who get it, adults get it too. Everything slows down, the pace slows down, no one's going anywhere fast, and you just sit. And it's a really lovely thing to do. Kids get it and they love it. I took people snorkeling, we went bird watching, we went on walks, we went on night walks on the beach, we had painting classes with adults in community centre. People did amazing stuff, beautiful, beautiful paintings. Bringing school groups down to the beach. We collected and pressed marine plant specimen. Children drew from resource material. They painted, and isn't that stunning, that little bearded dragon? I painted the background of this painting, and the children painted in the animals, and that's what we wound up with, the animals and the plants. So it's a record of the biodiversity of their own place. That painting's at the school. It's over 3 metres long and it's something that will be used for years to teach about biodiversity. And then with help from members of the community, I put together a stunning exhibition. Oh my God, it was so shimmeringly beautiful. We had drawings and paintings and photographs by children, their parents, their nanas and nonnas. Everyone in the community gave something to this show. Of course, putting on an exhibition is a bit of a production. I had it at the museum there in Geraldton, and it's a thing putting it up and making sure that everybody's name is on what they did. And the opening night was just stunning. Everyone went, oh, that's my piece. It's on the wall, or that's my nana's, or that's my daughter's, and the exhibition was set up to be a walk, if you like, from the top of the primary dune, down the dune, across the beach, out through the seagrass meadow and out to the fringing reef, with every animal and plant that's to be found in those different environments. And I've got to tell you, I had an idea it would be good, but I just didn't dream that it would be this fantastic. And then we did a series of public lecture events with local naturalists and scientists and biologists of all stripes. This particular one was the first, what did we call it? It was the first direct broadcast from a Petri dish under an iScope stand. And I think we were looking at amphipods, commonly known as sea fleas. And then there was activities that different school groups could come and visit the exhibition and go through a number of educational activities and learn something from the exhibition as well. Even if they had contributed to it, there's still a lot of structural learning that can come from it. And I was thrilled. Boy, I was thrilled with the success of it. When I went to Geraldton, I knew nobody, and now 5 years later, I have firm friendships there with like-minded people, and we continue to work together on biodiversity engagement and education. So I continue to deliver these types of fun educational community growing events with schools and community groups throughout Western Australia and in all environments. I love to set up field stations on beaches. These are the kind of hilarious posters that I make with lots of nice pictures so people get curious. And I invite scientists from the university to join me and bring equipment so kids can look at things and feel the joy of looking through a microscope. Yeah, it's a bit of mucking around, but once you get the hang of it, you can see some amazing things. I invite young students who are studying science and graduates and doctoral candidates to join me. And as you know, you have generously, Charlotte, you're a total star. And it's by sharing that knowledge and enthusiasm that we're going to grow the next generation of scientists, because young people see other people who look like their big sister or their older brother and they go, well, I could be a scientist. How exciting is that? I could be the person who has this knowledge about nature. These events are always really fun, and sometimes I can actually get kids to get in the water with me and come along and look at what's under the water, because most people don't really look under the water. They've got no idea, a vague idea, but no real idea. So I continue to do this, and it's extremely fun. And I also team up with anybody who wants to make information about nature. So this was Garden Gurus, and we did a thing about soil science, and I've had the good luck to work with soil scientists at the University of Western Australia. And wherever you look in nature, you find something fascinating. And if you're going to have a look in your compost tomorrow morning, first thing, or whip outside and have a look in your compost with your phone in your hand, because you get some stunning pictures of all those little creatures that live there. But I won't get started on Collembola, but except to say they're fantastic. They're very fascinating. And I also like to collaborate with schools to build on the experience their students had, and actually make publications using the beautiful paintings and drawings that the kids did as part of the process. So, and I write the occasional book with help from my scientific friends, for which I'm very grateful. And mostly they're very simple publications that are just a kind of a joyful romp through nature to get you to look at the things you wouldn't normally look at, like the tiny invertebrates that nobody mentions, but without them, entire systems would collapse. And I mention this because we're all concerned about, for example, the Japanese killing whales, but the fact is we're overfishing krill for omega oil, and when the krill disappear, there will be no whales. So these are the kind of gaps in our knowledge and understanding which are problematic for the natural world. And these are the kind of things that I can talk about in a very simple way, because there's lots of scientists to talk about it in a complex way. So the other thing that I'm really interested in doing is organising the interface for scientists to come and speak with the general public. And I approached the Conservation Council of Western Australia and said to them, look, how about we do a series of forums with ordinary people? You know, I'm an ordinary person and I'd love to be spoken to by a scientist who really knows what they're talking about. And Cons Council came with it, and we did 7 forums from Two Rocks down to Mandurah in community halls, in pubs, in schools, in all sorts of venues that were in very close proximity to people's lives they could go to easily. That's the people who wouldn't normally come to a university. And I think one of the problems with the science academies are that scientists tend to speak to each other. And at this time, when we're facing the challenges of climate change and the associated problems of our overuse of the environment, we need to reframe science knowledge in such a way that ordinary people can understand it. And these forums were a great way to do it. So the scientists were only given 10 minutes to talk each, because of course you can't let them go on for too long. And then the people could ask questions. And we did a stunning supper. So people stayed and they asked questions, and people were made to feel comfortable so that nobody laughed or snickered at them if they asked a silly question. And look, I've asked a million silly questions. It's really the only way to learn. And it's really nice to create an environment where people can come along and say, I'm concerned about this. Is it a thing? And know that they're speaking to an expert. And we had a stellar lineup of scientists, and a wonderful turnout of the general public. And it was a fantastic thing to do. It was extremely rewarding, and I look forward to more of this, because I think it's a great way for people to become engaged and get the scientists out of the universities, for God's sakes. So finally, the other fun thing that I do is adventures in the field. And I have been invited by a number of scientists to come as the community outreach person. So once again, there's no point doing science if you don't get people involved. And it's great to take along somebody who can make great noise and make it fun for the general public. So the Roebuck Bay Benthic survey in 2016 was the final field trip after a 20-year longitudinal survey of the little goobly things that live in the mudflats of the Western Kimberley. Now, most people wouldn't think about the goobly things that live in the mudflats, but that's the reason why the migratory birds go there. And those migratory birds are suffering from a loss of habitat in the East Asian flyway. And we know that we've lost up to 80% of the birds. So we want to make absolutely sure that when they finally make it to our own beautiful shores, that what they came to get is still there. And what this longitudinal survey has done is to observe and record the distribution and the numbers of these tiny invertebrates. So I'm just going to flick through a few slides. I probably put in too many images, but I can't stop myself. It was very rigorous work. You had to walk for it seemed like miles in the heat out on the mud flats to measure often up to your knees in wet mud, to take core samples and in order to find these beautiful little creatures, these tiny invertebrates. And some of them were too small to see with the naked eye. But that's what these birds, with all their different, beautiful, elegantly evolved beaks, specialised beaks, fly all the way here to find. And each of these target species had a particular bird that goes for it. I mention here, see those little flubbly bits coming out from what I suppose you could call the neck of this creature? That's its external lungs. I mean, the more you discover about nature, the more stunningly beautiful and surprising it is. I never run out of surprise. And it's great to have a scientist nearby who can explain it. So these tunicates are much less lovely, and it was explained to me hilariously that we've actually evolved from tunicates, so I suppose we've improved slightly. But on the other hand, tunicates are not destroying the biosphere, so I'm not 100% sure we have improved that much. And these are some of the birds that are absolutely and utterly at risk. So I had to include this picture of the of the hopcraft of all insanities, and a little bit about the process of going and doing a benthic survey. Now, what I did was I duplicated this in schools and with community groups. So we'd go out, well, we'll get to that in a minute, but you can see here that volunteers and scientists are sorting through all those little bits that were collected in the survey, and often late into the night, and then up bright and early the next morning to collect again. And the taxonomy team in the lab worked day and night, and often I think they were locked in the room because the organisers didn't want them to escape and lose a precious moment. And I mention here that when a taxonomist makes a discovery, it looks a little bit like this. They'll be gazing down a microscope like this, and they may look up for a moment. That's the moment, you know, they might have found something they've never seen before. They may look up for a moment, then they look down again, and they might go, and then everyone else looks up and goes, is there something there? That, you know, it could be something of interest. That is possibly a discovery. Now, I'm an artist. I would be bouncing off the walls. I would be yelling, I found something, I found something. Everyone come and have a look. But I guess that's the difference between us. And I'll never really be a scientist because I'll make too much noise and use too many adjectives. But it was fascinating to watch the process. Every last bit of sample is stored for further review in case there's some tiny skerrick of information that can be sucked out of it. As part of that, there was a lovely public lecture, and then I did the community engagement. So this is where we invited the general public to come down to the town beach in Broome and do exactly what the scientists had been doing across the research sites. It was considerably less rigorous, I might say, but people got an idea, and most of the people who took part said to me, look, I've never noticed all these creatures that are here in the mudflats. I never really looked. And that's what a lot of us do. We never really look. So tomorrow when you get up, go outside and have a real look. Go look in your garden. These are some of the things people were finding. The scientists themselves from the expedition were there helping and talking to kids. And that's Dr. Jane Prince, a very brilliant taxonomist from our own School of the Biological Sciences, who was extremely generous with her time and explaining things to children. Look at all these gorgeous, gobbly little creatures. Back to the back to the taxonomists. And, you know, it's arduous. It's arduous. There they are consulting texts and spotting minute differences that the rest of us couldn't possibly imagine, and carefully, rigorously recording their findings, and sheets of data that has to be collated, and then more sorting, and then working with rangers, and then sorting late into the night. I found it fascinating. I always find it fascinating to watch scientists do what they do. So once again, I was reproducing all that exciting work with the children at the Cable Beach Primary School, and this time I was assisted by the Department of Parks and Wildlife and the rangers who had been part of the whole process so far. And I love this image because this is an amazingly gobbly tropical rock that's completely covered with living creatures. And if you didn't stop and look, you would miss an entire zoo of wonders. Look at all these things. How about this? These are soft corals who are having a bit of a fight. Now, what insanity is that? More of these gorgeous little invertebrates. And showing the children how to spot them, how to record them. And then back in the classroom, drawing from photos. Set up a laboratory in the classroom. These photos were taken by the children with the iScope stands. So they had the satisfaction of really recording the animals that they had found that morning out there on Town Beach. And look at that stunning little drawing on the right of a burrowing sand shrimp, and see its one larger claw on the left-hand side. The male has one large claw and the female one there has got its eggs. All of these things you discover when you look closely. So I painted the background of the painting and the children filled it in with all of the exciting things they had found. First they painted them on paper and then they painted them on the painting. And in the end, the painting was a very lovely rendition of what they'd studied. But they'd grown up in this, but a lot of them admitted they'd never really looked. And now they were specialists. And they call themselves Benthic ecologists, which is great. And maybe some of those kids will go on to become scientists. But those kids will know that if they pour some rubbish down the drain in the street, it'll flow out to the bay and it will wipe out all these little things. And all these little invertebrates are terribly important for the larger things that eat them, and so on and so forth. It's about seeing ourselves in context with nature, which is something that we've forgotten to do for a while. I also went to Biddy Danga Community School and we did something similar with drawing. And then was the end of this wonderful survey and this friendship with people who had gathered from all over the world. And I was the lucky person to be there and to meet them and work with them for that period of time. So that was an amazing experience. And then finally, earlier this year, I was invited by the Schmidt Oceans Institute to join the Deep Sea Corals and Canyons expedition, which our own scientists from the Oceans Institute were part of. And it was really exciting. It's fantastic to be on a research vessel. It was quite stormy some of the time. And the food was fantastic, I've got to say. It's terribly exciting being with scientists who have prepared for a long time to be on an important expedition, because they come with all of their knowledge and enthusiasm, and they were generous with sharing it with me. I made it my business to photograph all the specimen that was brought up from the Lewin Canyon, and the Bremer Canyon, and we saw such wonders. You know, it felt a little bit like when I was 10 years old was the first steps on the moon, actually, and us kids went up to St Anne's Parlour on the upstairs of the convent to watch those scientists step out of the spaceship. And here we were on a ship, watching these beautiful images beamed up from sometimes as deep as 4.5 kilometres below us. So it was very, very interesting and a state-of-the-art technology. And I set up a little studio and did some colour sketches of what I was looking at. We did telecasts to schools on land, and I invited scientific colleagues to join me to talk about what they were doing, to explain what was happening out there on the Falkor. And it was really exciting. The kids actually spoke to the scientists and asked them questions, and they'd studied what we were doing, and it was as if they were on board with us. They felt so connected. And the scientists who participated in these telecasts with me are extremely generous. You'll see there is Greg Schmidt. He's a biochemist from the School of Biological Sciences at UWA, and the other chap is the chief engineer for the remotely controlled vehicle, and of course lots of kids are interested in robotics, so that was very exciting for them to ask him lots of questions. I took lots of photos of the beautiful things that we discovered and that were brought up. This is a scale worm that lost most of its scales, a poor little thing. It's nonetheless very beautiful. And I'll just dwell on this for a little moment, because the heart of this expedition was to collect stone corals whose skeletons are a particular kind of calcium carbonate known as aragonite, which records the ambient conditions for just the brief period that they were alive. Now, that's an amazing thing to think about, because some of the samples, some of the skeletons we were bringing up could have been as old as 40,000 years old. We talk about the ancient world. We talk about ancient Greece and Rome. Well, 1,500 years ago, nothing much. And this colonial coral here could be 40,000 years old. We're waiting for carbon dating on that. But 10,000 years is still pretty old. 5,000 years is still pretty old. This was a living flabellum. And I'm just going to go back to that. That's what it has tentacles like anemone. But, of course, it's a coral. So corals and anemones are cousins. Look how stunningly beautiful they are when they were dried out, to be packed up carefully and taken away for analysis. I was pleased to be able to photograph them. And these Foraminifera, which are single-celled animals, also hold within their shells or skeletons a record of ambient conditions. So I found it very fascinating to learn about that and to be able to beam it out and to show it to school kids. And I'm still talking with school kids and doing media releases about this, talking in everyday language. I don't presume to interpret what scientists do, but showing images of these lovely things that were brought up and directing people to the Schmidt Oceans Institute website where they can get a lot more information, opens doors to understanding about science. So that, by the way, is a foraminifera. It's a beautiful sculptural form, and it's a tiny, tiny little thing. It's only millimetres big. So here we are now in the time of COVID, and we all have to think differently about how we're going to do what we do well, only we've got to do it better. We've got to be more imaginative. We've got to find better ways to communicate. We've got to find better ways to learn and to work together to look after the planet. So that's my little talk. Thank you.
Fantastic, Angela. Thank you very much. And we've got in the live chat, and don't forget, if you're watching, you can ask Angela questions, and we'll ask her on live chat for you. And so Kevin said, love your work, Angela. Dob has also said, yay, Angela. So
thank you.
And Caitlin has a question. What's your experience with ecological grief, and does it play a role in why you paint?
Caitlin, thank you. That's a brilliant question. That is what we are all faced with. It's the feeling like somebody beloved is slipping from your hands.
Grief.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
That's what motivates me.
Yeah, that's good. As someone that's myself working on climate change, I think it's you can't really remove yourself from that. You do get involved, and especially
Noam Chomsky, the great provocateur in the United States, says he is active. His activism is so that he can face himself in the mirror every morning.
Wow, that's powerful.
And that's how I feel. I feel if I'm not being active, if I'm not encouraging or inspiring other people to be active about protecting the planet, then I've failed.
I noticed that you said before it's important to get scientists out of the academy. So if scientists did want to work with you, how would they get in touch with you? Are you open to, you said that you're open to work on a lot of different projects. Do you have some in particular in mind, or? No,
I'm open, but biology is a thing that interests me. I don't presume to enter other areas. I'm ashamed to say I failed physics at school due to a general lack of interest, because I spent the whole time in the art room and the music room. But I'm interested in communicating about biology. So if someone is interested in a project, give me a hoy.
And I know that you've shared a lot with us this evening, but what would be a highlight? Does one thing come to mind, either one trip or one experience with some of the children or the youth that you work with? Does anything come to mind in particular?
Yes, I can answer that immediately, and it is the look of astonishment on a child's face.
Yeah.
There's one slide there where a little boy, he found something on the iScope stand and he looked up and his whole face was full of wonder. And when you work with children, you see that the whole time, and you often see it with adults.
Yeah. And you mentioned the iScope, and I know you showed us a slide before how it's got the microscope and the clear slate. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, as I said, a science teacher in Michigan posted the idea on the web. In fact, there's a funny story because my daughter was doing her final year at school, and I stumbled across the idea about 9 o'clock in the evening, and by 12 o'clock I'd managed to make one by taking things apart and drilling holes in things and looking for bolts, and I think I'd dismantled half the house. Finally, she got out of bed at 12 o'clock and said, "Okay, Mum, just go to sleep. I've had enough of this nonsense.
Yeah.
Just go to sleep."
Yeah.
But what happened was this chap put the idea out to be used, and I looked at it and I thought I could develop that into something that's robust enough to use in schools and for field work. And I made a much bigger version. I collaborated with this retired gentleman, Graham Harris, and he actually makes them. I don't have any financial interest in it, but I wanted them to be made and sold cheaply to schools, and he does it. And anybody can look up iScopeStand.com and order themselves an iScope stand and then use it to fire their enthusiasm to protect the planet.
Yeah, and I've been at a couple of, as you know, Perth science fairs and whatnot with you, and I've seen the people, the adults and the children, because everyone's got a phone, and they look at it, and then you say, this is the sand that you just walk over, and you see children look at it, go, I'm going to go to the beach tomorrow and look at seaweed or sand, and it really does inspire that love of nature in them.
And if we don't start looking at the small details, we're going to miss out on the big picture. That because it's those tiny creatures that hold the entire system on their backs, and we can look at them now. Smartphones have got so smart, so clever that they've got incredible optics, and just by enhancing it slightly, you wind up with a microscope in your pocket. In fact, you can just buy a little clip-on macro lens. They're quite cheap, and have it in your pocket, and when you go out tomorrow morning and look in your compost with a macro lens.
You'll have
so much fun. I could spend hours doing that.
Yeah, great. We've got a question from Rob. Thanks, Angela. Do you find you have to convince scientists of the value of art, or are they usually supportive? That's a good question.
No, scientists get art, but I'm not peddling the importance of art. I don't have to. Every one of us knows in their heart that art is fundamental to our well-being. It's in our cooking, it's in our talking to each other, it's in our humming in the shower, it's in our humble efforts to learn an instrument, it's in our loving messages we write to beloved people. We are inseparable from art, but what people don't realise is that they're also inseparable from science. It is part of our lives, and my mission is to get people to come to that understanding. So, no, I've never had a scientist who feels that it's irrelevant, but yeah, anyway.
Well, that's good to hear from the scientist side of things. And Dob's got a lovely comment that your work and the workshops are the embodiment of the saying, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. You've shown that the people are willing to learn and grow. And I think it's very good building on that, how you do have the scientists on one side and you have the public on the other, and being almost a conduit between that. It's a great place to be and really making change.
Yes, and now the challenge is at this time where we can't actually be together is to find a way to continue that work. And I have been making some humble efforts at little videos, and I live with a cheerful expectation that my videography will improve. I am assisted by my wonderful partner, but we more than ever now at this time of COVID, we have to communicate and reassure each other and work together. And we can do that because we're marvellous creatures. We have everything wonderful in us. We've got a few regrettable traits, but there's more about us that's creative and good, and this is the time we need it. Think about those poor people locked up in a tower in Victoria, in those towers. They need messages of support and generosity, and there's a whole lot of different ways that we can communicate now because we've got the tools in our pocket.
Yeah, exactly. And even Steven Spielberg started somewhere.
Yeah.
And I noticed that your art does support science and sort of gets the message across. So how can sort of ordinary people that are watching this, that are interested, how can they support science? How can they sort of instill this love of science into their children, family, friends?
This is really a great question, Charlotte, because for a lot of my life, I felt that science was nothing to do with me. I thought, yep, I'm an artist and I play music and science is what other people do. My advice is be curious. And the minute you're curious, you'll go on that journey. And the minute you start asking questions, you will search for more and more complex answers.
Yeah.
And that search will take you to science, because that's where you'll find answers that challenge you and that you can know came from a process that was rigorous and honest and transparent and did not involve opinion or faith.
Yeah. Hannah's got a question. Thank you for sharing your interesting experiences. And do you have any artwork that you sell at all?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. I live in the cheerful expectation that somebody might come one day and buy a painting. Just look me up. I'm on Facebook and all of those things, Instagram, and Angela Rossen, www.angelarossen.com, and there you go.
Yeah, and the spelling's on the screen at the moment, and it's also, I believe, in the title of the YouTube video.
Yeah.
I noticed you also mentioned that you used to look at things through the eyes of an artist, and you learned to look through the eyes of a scientist. Let me know if I paraphrase that incorrectly. So what do you think is the major difference in between those two? Because they both obviously, probably, hopefully, look for beauty, but what's the difference between looking as a scientist and looking as an artist?
One looks at the visual and one looks deeply into the structure. And I think a real artist finally looks deeply into the structure too. And I've been greatly assisted by my work with scientists. So I would tend to find something and think to myself, why is that so? Not, oh, here's something interesting.
Yeah.
Why is it here? Are there more of them? Is it worn at the edge? If this, for example, shell is completely worn and I can't find any more shells that look like they've been alive recently, perhaps this shell is part of a population of mollusks that no longer really exists here. And so you start to ask yourself more rigorous questions. And it changes your life. It changes the way you see the whole world. I'm telling you, find yourself a tame scientist. They're great.
Well, there's plenty at UWA.
Yeah.
And I noticed that you're obviously very passionate about climate change, and that came across in a couple of times. Why did climate change impact you so much? Because you also mentioned overfishing and a lot of the other things, and of course we've got forests and everything. Why was it climate change that moves you so strongly?
Well, climate change is a thing that's impacting our biosphere. That is the thin membrane of habitable, livable space that goes around our globe. And it's the result of an economic paradigm that no longer works. If profit is the bottom line for success, then somebody's got to lose. And the COVID pandemic has brought that into starkly into our vision. We're as strong as the poorest and the most vulnerable around us. And if we're buying T-shirts from Bangladesh where women are not being paid, we're committing a crime against them. And if we allow LNG companies, liquid natural gas companies, to pollute without any recourse to offsetting their pollution, we're allowing a crime against future generations. If we continue to consume at the rate we're consuming, we are committing shameless crime against future generations. And when you understand the magnitude, as you do, Charlotte, of what's happening to our planet, what you realise is there's not really a moment to sleep. Every one of us must be writing to our politicians every minute of the day.
Yeah.
We must be passionate. We must educate ourselves. We must read intelligently. We must speak with passion about these things and not be put off by our friends who go, oh, I'd rather talk about my holiday in Bali, because there will be no holiday in Bali soon. It'll be under the ocean. and it's only generations away. And we are the last generation that can do something. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is every government in the world who came together with their scientists to look at the problem, have said we've got, now it's 11 years or something, to turn it around, to stop our pollution. That fills me with a deep sense of dread. And I want to do something, however little it is, that may contribute. And if every one of us does something, we can make a difference, a huge difference if every one of us does something. And I just mention this. If you think you can't do something, then donate to somebody who can.
Mm.
Yeah, give your money to the Conservation Council or some other organisation you really trust. You know, because every one of us can do something. My friend Rebecca Prince-Roos, who started Plastic Free July, started in her lounge room in Fremantle 10 years ago, and now 240 million people worldwide are taking part. She says, and this inspires me, not everybody can do everything, but everybody can do something.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Mm.
And so what is next for Angela Rossen? Big project in the pipeline.
I continue to work with my colleagues at the university, in Australian Institute of Marine Science, in the School of Biological Sciences, and at the Oceans Institute at the University of WA. I'm interested in working with other entities. And as I said earlier, at this time of COVID, we've just got to find better ways to do what we do. I'm not quite sure. I'm thinking about it.
Yeah,
I'm on the job.
And open to collaboration.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Angela. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
You're welcome. And to everyone who's watching, don't forget, if you enjoyed this, you can follow the Oceans Institute on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, like the video, subscribe, and also check the back catalogue. There's other videos dealing with everything from plastic pollution to sharks. You might recognise some faces in that one. I'm just saying. And a variety of different topics. And of course, we have marine megafauna coming up in the next Oceans Institute live chat. So there's plenty to keep your interest. And thank you very much for joining us tonight, Angela. And thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Pleasure.